Hello, for this third film in our series of forecasting films, I'm going to talk to you about solar arc directions and secondary progressions. Two techniques that one applies to the natal chart and that one also uses with transits. Hundreds of years ago, these techniques would have been used much more than they are today. It is actually possible to do forecasting work without using transits, although I doubt whether any of us would do that. Anyway, here on slide 2, it says that with directions, the whole chart is moved forwards or backwards by a specified arc. So 1 degree directions, you would move the whole chart by 1 degree per year. So if you were 40, you would add 40 degrees to everything, and that would say something about your 40th year and be exact on your 40th birthday. But with progressions, which I'm going to start with, what we say is that one cycle of time, i.e. a day, is seen to encapsulate a longer cycle of time, e.g. a year. And secondary progressions are that. A day equals a year. So if you were calculating secondary progressions by hand, you would count, if you were interested in the 30th year, you would count 30 days on from when the person was born. So secondary progressions, as you see here in slide 4, are based on the second movement of the Earth, its revolution around the Sun. As I say, a day equals a year. And we know that this is a very old technique. The astrologer Johannes Kepler, for example, mentions it in his 1610 book. So let's just take an example of that. Well, there are actually, perhaps I should introduce the fact that there are other progressions. You don't have to do a day equals a year. And the two better known ones are tertiary and minor progressions, and these were, as you'll see in slide 5, these were discovered by the German astrologer Troinski in the early 1950s. And he came up with tertiary, which is 1 day after birth equals a lunar month. A lunar month is like if you're born with the moon at 4 of Cancer, a month later, when it's at 4 of Cancer again, that would be a lunar month. Or you can do minor progressions where 1 lunar month equals 1 year of life. In other words, a rotation of the moon equals 1 rotation of the Earth. Now, I'm not going to do anything about these techniques. I think they do work, but why bother is, I suppose, what I think. There's millions of techniques, we don't have to use them all. But you could play with them. I'm assuming that most of you will do your calculation work on the computer. But let's just go back to secondary progressions. So let's take Fred. Fred was born on the 1st of January 1984, on slide 6. He was born at noon in London. I say noon because it makes it easy. I put she. Anyway, Fred was 30 years old on the 1st of January 2014. Okay, that would be the 30th birthday. So you would add 30 days to the birth date, which is the 1st of January 1984, and that would take you to the 31st of January 1984. That's known as the progressed date. And then what you do is you take the positions out of the ephemerist on the 31st of January, the progressed date, 1984, and they will exactly relate to his 30th birthday, 1st of January 2014. So you do a bi-wheel with the natal chart in the middle and the secondary progressed chart on the outside. That's what one usually does. And here I've done it for Fred on slide 8. Fred is a made-up person, so we're not going to spend any particular time with this, although I would notice that the progressed Venus, just close to the midheaven in the 9th house, the progressed Venus is conjunct Fred's Mercury for that year. So if one was using this technique and Fred existed, we would spend some time considering what progressed Venus conjunct Mercury might mean. Okay. Now, what you'll notice is that if a day equals a year, as it does with secondary progressions, a day equals a year, that means most of the planets don't move much. So you ignore Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, Chiron moving. You virtually ignore that because in 30 days they'll have only moved a minute or two, maybe a degree with Jupiter, maybe 3 degrees with Jupiter, but mostly they won't have moved. The personal planets, though, will be moving an amount every day. The Sun, for example, a degree a day, a degree a year, therefore. But the Moon moves 12 to 14 degrees a day, which means by this 1 day equals 1 year technique of secondary progressions, it means that the Moon is actually moving a degree a month. So you need to be aware of that. So here on slide 8, you can see that Fred's Moon is at 24 of Capricorn, 24, 22, I think it is, of Capricorn in the 10th house, whereas on slide 10 you can see that the Moon should have moved. Oh, something's gone wrong here. Oh. Well, anyway, on slide 10 you'll see that the Moon has moved to 6 degrees of Aquarius, and here on slide 9 you can see exactly where the progressed Moon is on these 2 days, which equals these 2 years. So I've written it here. As you can see, the progressed Moon on the 31st of January, which equals the 1st of January 2014. The progressed Moon is at 24:12 of Capricorn. A day later, which is a year later, it's at 6:26 of Aquarius. So the difference between these two is 12 degrees and 4 minutes. So your computer would do it very accurately how much it's moving per month, but you can see it always moves about a degree a month. Sometimes it's a bit more. So, and the progressed Moon, well, perhaps it's time to think about how you interpret the progressions moving. As I say, for secondary progressions, there's many days or years, if you like, where not much is happening. You spend about 5 minutes looking to see if anything has happened, and if not, you just go on and use your other techniques. Now, your progressed Sun, which is the same as your solar arc Sun, as you will discover, is something to watch. So it's moving a degree a year. So you can see that every now and again it'll actually change signs or change houses. You might want to notice that if you're born as a Sun in Aries. Or do you feel any different the year that your Sun moves into Taurus? Maybe, maybe not. And all the other progressed personal planets also change signs. A progressed Moon will change signs every 2.5 years approximately. But the most important thing about secondary progressions and indeed directions is the angles as they move around the chart. And one of the most important things to consider with these techniques is that you need an accurate time of birth. And in fact, moving these angles would be one of the ways that you would rectify a chart, that you'd find out. It'd be one of the things you'd take into consideration if you were trying to work out the time of somebody's birth if they didn't know it. So for all the major events in life, I'm talking about major events, you will usually find that the progressed angles, so ascendant, descendant, MCIC, for all the major events, they will be hitting a planet in the natal chart. One or both of these techniques. For all major events, it's pretty conclusive that that happens. Sometimes it's with the Sun, this transits to the Sun or something like that, but any angle making a contact to a planet stimulates that planet, whatever that planet is about in the natal chart. It will be brought into prominence in the life. And obviously you don't just look at this, you look at transits and other techniques as well. But that planet, whatever it is kind of stoked up. And a conjunction will be felt with the most immediacy. I will show you examples in a minute. So, but all aspects may be felt. If you were a medieval astrologer and you were using these techniques, you would look at every aspect. So the whole chart obviously is the self, but the ascendant is like the front door, and the ascendant descendant, as it's moving, is going to have the most impact on one's relationships and one's health, and how one comes along, how one comes across, how one projects oneself in the world. So marital and other major relationships might be affected. The other thing to bear in mind is not just the angles moving, but the progressed planets may move till they hit an angle, and you'd interpret that in the same way. So, and also the angles will change sign. Do you feel that or do you not? That will vary between people. The MCIC axis, as it's moving, will say something about shifts in one's career, one's vocational goals, home changes, moving house, discoveries about your roots, where you came from. That's an IC issue. All issues to do with where you're going to and where you're coming from. And it's a parental axis. So the MCIC axis is very important in that context. Very, very important axes, as I say. I'll show you examples anon. Now, the progressed sun, if you think about the sun natally, the sun is about consciousness. And so that as the sun moves around the chart, it says something about our urge towards consciousness. As the sun hits any planet in the chart, as the progressed or directed sun hits any planet in the chart, we're being given an opportunity for gaining greater consciousness with respect to the planet that's being touched. It's like a spotlight being put on that planet. We may seek to shine through that planet, if you think about the sun and the sun shining. So the sun moves, as we've seen, about 1 degree a year. So there's going to be many, many years when there's no contact being made. But when it does happen, well, you want to be aware of it, really. You can think about the sun as the hero on its journey. So it's the hero on the heroic journey, and what the hero is meeting, what challenges the hero is meeting as it goes through this journey. So it's like a torch. It's like a moving torch in the chart. It puts a spotlight on what is being touched, and it can be quite powerful, really. The progressed moon, as I said, moves 1 degree a month. And some astrologers put a lot of work into the progressed moon, and there are whole books written about this subject. But personally, I'm really only interested when the progressed moon hits an angle, MCIC, ascendant, descendant, or major aspects to the other planets. But really, I only really use the angles, but you might want to use more than that. So the progressed moves fast. And so it will only be, for example, on your IC, for example, for a month, 2 months if you want to use a bit of an orb. Say somebody came to you and said, I'm thinking of moving, when will I move house? This might be one of the things you would look at. The moon we associate with home, the IC we associate with home. And if the progressed moon happened to be coming to the IC, you'd possibly really ask somebody, are you thinking of moving house? That would be likely. Something like that. Or the IC moving and hitting a planet might also be you moving house. So the progressed moon will change sign every 2.5 years, and every now and again will hit a planet in the natal chart. It just activates, it just triggers what it touches. And as we think of the lunar quality being about sensitivity, you can say that the progressed moon, as it moves around the chart, when it hits something, will be more sensitive to whatever the issues are being touched, whatever issues described by a given planet. You'll be more sensitive to it. You will be more able to feel what is going on and to respond appropriately using these lunar words of feeling and sensitivity and response. As the moon changes sign, you may find that you mix with people who vibrate to that given sign more than usually, or the issues. And it's like these people will help you become more sensitive to what those things are. It's really when they hit the angles that I would be interested. The progressed Mercury, now Mercury in the ephemeris, as you know, can go backwards as well as forwards. And it's worth watching the years that your progressed Mercury changes sign. If it has done that whilst in your school years, for example, has that changed your pattern of learning, your circumstances at school? When a planet goes retrograde, stuff often goes in a more internal kind of way. Does this change when your Mercury changes direction? I mean, you may be born with a retrograde Mercury. What happens when you change sign? And Mercury, when Mercury touches a planet, you may want to learn or communicate, usual mercurial words, more about those given issues of life. And Mercury, as messenger of the gods, was also messenger between the sun and moon. And it's often very prominent at the times of childbirth. And again, we'll see a few examples of that. And progressed and directed Venus, progressed Venus, directed Venus is a bit different, but this would trigger your affections, may shed light on your love life. And for just about everybody, well, unless you're born with it exact, everybody will have a period, a year, when the progressed Sun conjuncts Venus or the progressed Venus hits the Sun. This is very classic love affair territory if it happens at the right age. But if you were 3 years old, I think you'd make a close friend at that time, or as much as a 3-year-old can. So it's worth, and progressed Venus, of course, is also to be associated with money and values and that kind of stuff. So it's just common sense how you interpret the progressed planets, really. Let's see if we can find an example. All right, I'm going to slide 14 now. Slide 14 is, in the middle, you have the chart of an old Prime Minister of the UK called Gordon Brown. And on the outer wheel, it's when he became Prime Minister. Now, he had acted as a Chancellor of the Exchequer for many years under the leadership of Tony Blair. And it was clear that he always wanted to be Prime Minister, or so the rumour has it anyway. And when Tony eventually stepped down, I can't remember whether he had to, or anyway, whenever he stepped down, Gordon Brown took over. But there was a question for a time about whether he would and whether he would be able to. But if you actually look at the progressions for the time in question, you can absolutely see that he'd get the top job. So if you look at slide 14, you'll see that the progressed midheaven is at 0 degrees 41 of Pisces, exactly conjunct his sun at 54 of Pisces. You don't bother about things to the minute when it comes to progressions. So progressed midheaven, planet of career, vocation, calling, fame, if you like, hits his sun. It absolutely describes the fact of, it's like a promotion, it's like becoming king, absolutely described by it. There are other things going on, but we won't worry with those. And of course, we wouldn't look at this in isolation. Let's go to slide 16, which is the slide for Princess Diana who I imagine you're all familiar with. She seemed to have a worldwide reputation. And you'll all know that she died in a nasty car crash. And I'll come back to the question, does the potential for that show in her natal horoscope here in slide 16? And it does. She has a Mars, Pluto, Uranus, all in the 8th house of death, and the node there. Uranus is a bit wide of a conjunction for Pluto, but it is conjunct the Mars. It absolutely does describe the potential for a fast and rather violent demise. But actually, let's look at when this happened from a secondary progressed point of view. So I'm going on the next slide, which is 17. And what we have is the progressed ascendant, which, if you remember, I'm saying the progressed angles are very important. The progressed ascendant has moved to about 22 of Capricorn, and I'll show you the next slide, it's clearer. It's moved to 22 of Capricorn, and that is sesquiquadrate the Pluto, planet of death in the death house. It also picks up Chiron, which is another planet one associates with death. On its own, you might not be too worried about it, but you would think that on this particular year there is going to be some issue around survival. Well, that's certainly a possibility. Now, if I carry on with the progressions onto slide 19, you'll see that her progressed Mercury, up in the 8th house, her progressed Mercury is at 5 of Leo, opposing her natal Jupiter at 5 of Aquarius, and that transiting Uranus, I've written here, is at 5 of Aquarius. So we've got Mercury, Jupiter, Uranus all in a line. And I think that describes the potential of something unexpected happening in terms of transport. You will also notice that year that looking in the 7th house, you'll see that her progressed Venus at 3 of Cancer is conjunct her natal Mercury. So 7th house, Venus is love, 7th house relationships. So here, that describes the potential for a new love interest, which is in fact what was going on at the time. Mercury and Venus together, well, it's the stuff of love letters, isn't it? If you think of Mercury, it's to do with communication, love letters, romantic novels. It's pillow talk, which is something that sometimes happens in a romantic context. So the relationship is well shown. And carrying on and just going back to this rather nasty event, you could look at what else is going on as well. And this is with 3. So you've got the natal chart in the middle, the progressions around the natal chart, and then the transits for the moment on the outside. And here you'll see that, for example, the transiting Jupiter at 14 of Aquarius, so the transit of Jupiter at 14 Aquarius, opposes Diana's progressed Sun. So how you would read that on its own, one feels part of it is a more enthusiastic, buoyant, optimistic kind of thing, but it again brings in this travel aspect of it. And the transiting moon, which will happen every month, the transiting moon is conjunct the Uranus. So all the other stuff that we've seen, the progressed angles and various things I've talked about, these faster moving thing of the progressed moon, it triggers it. That's the thing about timing and forecasting. You've got the slow moving stuff of the progressions, except for the progressed moon, which is a month. But you've got the slow-moving things, and then you have faster-moving things, Jupiter, Saturn, and then you have the very fast planets, so everything triggers. And this is why some of the major forecasting stuff you might be looking at, the event doesn't happen to the moment. It might be a slight orb. It's triggered by other things. As you'll see here, the progressed moon at 25:49 of Leo at the time of the accident, exactly on her, in fact, progressed Uranus, because Uranus has moved from 23:20 of Leo to 25:22 of Leo in the 36 years in which she lived. You can, with progressions, also go backwards. Actually, but before I do that, let me show you here on slide 21. You can actually look at the progressed chart in its own right. I never actually do that, but you could do that. And so here is the progressed chart in its own right, and you'll see this yod to the Saturn, so a quincunx from Uranus to the Saturn and a quincunx from the moon to the Saturn. And bear in mind that that moon will only be there for a month. But you can go backwards with progressions, directions, and even transits. You can go back. If you are 49 years, 2 months and 3 days old, you can actually, looking the ephemeris, go backwards 49 years, 2 months, 3 days, or whatever I said. You can go backwards. Again, it's too hard basket. Why would you bother? But you'll find it does work. But here, on slide 22, you'll see that I have. So Diana was 36 years old and 2 months, and I've progressed her chart backwards, which takes us to the 1st of May 1925. In other words, 36 years and 2 months and however many days before she was born. And if you do that, you'll see that the sun will have gone backwards, of course. It will have gone backwards 36 degrees odd, and you'll see that the sun here is at, look in the 6th house, you'll see that the sun is at 5:05 of Gemini, squaring the Pluto. 1 degree off, but within a degree, sun square Pluto. Her progressed Mercury is quincunx Saturn. That's fairly tight, about 1/4 of a degree. And her progressed ascendant, which of course has also gone backwards, is at 24, nearly 25 of Scorpio, and that picks up her T-square, her Venus, Moon, Uranus T-square, the T-square that describes her anorexia and emotional fragility, perhaps. But going backwards, you might interpret it slightly different, but you can go backwards. Still staying with secondary progressions, and still actually with Princess Diana's chart. And here we're looking on slide 24 at the birth of her first child, who was Prince William, I think. And here you can see the arrow. The progressed Mercury is conjunct her sun in Cancer, the sign of mothering, Cancer. And as I was saying to you earlier, you'll often find Mercury involved. It's either Mercury, the moon, the progressed moon, transiting Saturn. Those are the kind of things you particularly see with the birth of the first child. And here, progressed Mercury conjunct the sun. Okay? It's very tight. Okay, so this is a chart of somebody else, somebody who's not famous, and their first child. So on the outer wheel is the child's birth chart, which is, of course, a transit chart for the mother. In the centre is the mother's horoscope, and the middle circle is the progressions for the birth of the child, who's called Shumi, so we might as well call her by her name. Okay, so let's actually look at here. So transiting ascendant, the child's ascendant, is 22 of Taurus. And that opposes the progressed Mercury of the mother at 22 of Scorpio. And in the sky, transiting node is at 22 of Scorpio. So you can see this 22, 22, 22 thing going on. And the progressed moon at the birth is at 26 of Virgo, and that is conjunct Venus. It is an experience of love, having the child. And you can see that all of it is around the 5th house. There are other things going on, but that's how you kind of do it, really. And here's an example from my own chart. Some of you will be looking at this film because you know of my books. And my first book, so I have Mercury in the 6th house at 21, this is slide 26, Mercury in the 6th house at 21:31 of Aquarius. And yes, when my first book came out, I had progressed Mercury on the descendant. Mercury, surely one of the planets you'd associate with books. And then I didn't write anything for, well, I didn't publish anything for, God knows, 16, 17 years. And Mercury changed direction, so Mercury went down, changed direction, and when it's back in exactly the same place, out comes my second book. So all completely unconscious. Okay, so let's think about solar arc directions now. Now, solar arc directions, you can use any sort of direction. As I say, you can do 1 degree directions where you add 1 degree to everything in the horoscope per year. But the one that works best, most accurately, is to use solar arc directions. And here on slide 28, I'm taking you back to Fred and his 30th birthday. You can see that his natal sun, his natal sun in his natal chart is 10:15 of Capricorn, and his progressed sun, 30 days, which equals 30 years later, his progressed sun is 10 degrees 48. So the difference is 30 degrees and 33 minutes. So if one was interested in Fred's solar arc directions for his 30th year, one would add 30 degrees, 33 minutes to everything in his horoscope. So you can see that with directions, everything moves. The outer planets, everything moves. And here, I've done it with Fred. So everything has been moved 30 degrees and 33 minutes. And using directions, more moves, because you've got 10 planets or whatever you're using, the nodes maybe, Chiron maybe, whatever you're using, you move everything around with the progressed sun, in effect. So here you are, slide 30. I've said you add 30 degrees, 33 minutes to everything in his chart, and that's his solar arc directions. All right, well, let's see an example of, well, actually, before we see an example, what I should say is that with directions, you can interpret them very similarly to how you would interpret transits. But you remember that each of them lasts about a year, and you give it great prominence. And you're not using ephemeris here. Everything is going forwards as well. With progressions, some things will go backwards because you're using an ephemeris. It's whether a planet actually did go forwards or backwards after the birthday. All right, let's look at an example, using all the techniques together a little bit. So I'm going to use the example of Susan Boyle, a singer you may have heard of, using her transits, progressions and directions on the year that she sprang to fame. We'll look at a YouTube film about her in a moment. But basically, she is a woman who, is autistic, actually, and had great difficulty. She didn't have a career particularly. She lived in Scotland, looked after her mum, was one of 11 children, and lived a very ordinary kind of life, and then was catapulted to fame. Let's look at the video about her.
So, Glasgow's got a great theatre, a lively crowd and a great atmosphere. So far though, there's just one thing missing.
Talent. Yes, tensions are high backstage as everyone wonders where that talent is going to come from.
But next up is a contestant who thinks she has what it takes to put Glasgow on the map. Hello there.
Hello, how you doing?
I'm good, how are you?
My name is Susan Boyle. I'm nearly 48, currently unemployed but still looking. And I'm going to sing for you on Britain's Got Talent today.
A little nervous.
Yeah, sure, no.
Yeah, well, that's not surprising, but, you know, try.
I've got a fighting mood, you know. At the moment I live in London with my cat called Pebbles. But I've never been married. Never been kissed. Oh, shame. But it's not an advert.
And have you done this for many a year?
Since I was 12.
Since you're 12?
I've always wanted to perform in front of a large audience. I'm going to make that audience rock.
Hi, what's your name, darling?
My name is Susan Boyle.
Okay, Susan, and where are you from?
I am from Blackburn near Bathgate, West Lothian.
It's a big town.
It's a sort of collection of villages. I had to think there.
And how old are you, Susan?
I am 47. And that's just one side of me.
Okay, what's the dream?
I'm trying to be a professional singer.
And why hasn't it worked out so far, Susan?
I've never been given the chance before, but here's hoping it'll change.
Okay, and who would you like to be as successful as?
Elaine Page.
Elaine
something like
Page.
that.
What are you going to sing tonight?
I'm going to sing I Dreamed a Dream from the Miserables.
Okay.
Big song.
Yeah? Yes.
I dreamed a dream in time gone by.
You didn't expect that, did you? Did you? No.
I dreamed of love would never die. I dreamed that God would be forgiven. I was young and unafraid. When dreams are made and used and wasted, there was no ransom to be paid. No song unsung, no wine untasted. But the tigers come with their voices soft as thunder, as they tear your hopes apart, as they turn your dreams to shame. Still I dream it come to me. Live our lives together, but never dreams it cannot be, and never storms we cannot weather. I had a dream like that would be so different from this day I'm living, so different now from what it seems. No life has killed the dream I dream.
Hello. Hey, come back here.
Yes.
All right, thank you very much, Susan. Piers.
Without a doubt, that was the biggest surprise I have had in 3 years on this show. When you stood there with that cheeky grin and said, I want to be like Elaine Page, everyone was laughing at you. No one is laughing now. That was stunning. An incredible performance. amazing. I'm reeling from shock. How about you two? But
I am
Can't
so
believe it.
thrilled because I know that everybody was against you. I honestly think that we were all being very cynical, and I think that's the biggest wake-up call ever. And I just want to say that it was a complete privilege listening to that. It was brilliant.
Susan, I knew the minute you walked out
Oh, Simon!
on that stage that we were going to hear something extraordinary, and I was right.
Quite a lot of touch.
Susan, you are a little tiger, aren't you?
Oh, I don't know about that.
You are.
don't know about that.
Okay, moment of truth. Here's yes or no.
the biggest yes I have ever given anybody.
Amanda?
Yes, definitely. Brilliant.
Susan Boyle, you can go back to the village with your head held high. It's 3 yeses.
I think you enjoyed that just a little.
What did we have?
What a voice.
Incredible.
Congratulations.
Oh my god!
Congratulations. How do you feel?
Bloody fantastic!
Peter says that's the biggest yes he's ever given on the show. In 3 series.
Yeah.
Oh my god!
Mind-blowing.
Most extraordinary shock we've ever had.
Just so emotional. Unbelievable and emotional. And fantastic.
As you'll see from the film, and I know some of you will already seen this on YouTube because hundreds of millions of people have watched this, the judges and indeed the studio audience were not desperately sympathetic towards Susan. And in fact, one of the judges, Piers Morgan, said at the time that we were expecting a car crash of epidemic proportions. And as I'm sure you noticed on the film, even if you didn't understand it, you could see everybody's face. And then she opens her mouth and everybody is completely struck by her voice. So let's have a little look at her natal chart, and then we'll have a little look at the progressions, directions and transits for the year that everything kicked off for her. So in her natal chart, we won't look at all the chart, but you'll notice that there is a tight T-square involving Sun, Moon and Mars. Now, it's important to really notice this T-square because you'll see that the Sun is in Aries, the Mars sign. It is square Mars. Mars is in Cancer, which is ruled by the Moon, and the Moon square Mars. So it is such a Marsy T-square. And really, I think it has to be one of the first things you think about with Susan. That doesn't immediately put you in mind of a singer. It doesn't immediately put you in mind of fame and fortune. But what it does do is describe aspects of Susan. It describes somebody who's feisty, somebody who is sparky, somebody who has daring, somebody who is very competitive. She was one of, I think it's 11 children. She was the last born, and she had to fight for life right from the beginning because her mother, is it 11 or 9 children? I've forgotten. But anyway, however many children it is, her mother, when she fell pregnant, was advised that the pregnancy was not safe. And the doctors wanted her to have a termination, have an abortion. And the family, and mother particularly, are staunch Catholics. And, well, she wouldn't hear of it. And so she went ahead with the birth of Susan. And in fact, they both nearly died at birth. It really was touch and go. So there was a fight for life right from the word go. This woman is a fighter and has to be. And then it transpired that she has learning difficulties. She was told at the time, and her parents were told at the time, that the learning difficulties were because of a slight lack of oxygen when she was being born. But in more recent years, she's discovered that she has Asperger's syndrome. Oh, that is the label that has been ascribed to her. And Asperger's is a disorder on the autistic spectrum, and varies hugely in its severity between people. But sufferers usually have quite strong skills, as well as some difficulties communicating. And I think perhaps you saw some of that on the film. Anyway, the Sun, Moon, Mars is describing the Susan that's a fighter. When she went for the audition, just about everything went wrong, and she realised she put the wrong dress on, and her shoes got wet, and a whole pile of stuff, which you can read in her biography if you want to. But and then when she got to the audition, they weren't expecting her, so she nearly didn't get to sing at all. She had actually been singing her whole life and had entered competitions in Scotland and won some of them, mostly coming second. So she had been singing, and she had been having singing lessons. So the Mars is quite important, but there's also one or two weird and wacky planets that you can use. You can use asteroids, and I did notice that Sirius is conjunct her Mars. Sirius is the brightest star in the sky. At about 13 of Cancer. So the chart for America, the US of A, has the Sun conjunct Sirius, as does anybody born around the 6th of July. The Dalai Lama has his Sun there too, also born there, but it's the brightest star in the sky. And in the same way that some people would think that America shines, there's something about the brightest star. And also there is an asteroid called Terpsichore conjunct the Sun. And the word Terpsichore actually means delight in dance. Now, Susan's not a dancer, but as you probably saw on the film, she does a little dance. She does that little dance whenever she's happy. It's also associated actually with singers to a lesser extent. And I won't go into an out-of-bounds Mars, which I see I've written there, but it adds to the Marsy quality of the chart. Now, the other major aspect to look at the chart is that she has Venus square Jupiter, Saturn. And when she won the competition, she said that she had never been kissed in a romantic sense. So she'd never had any kind of romantic life. She did have a boyfriend briefly, but her father was a little bit worried about this and put paid to it, shall we say. So the Venus square Jupiter Saturn is saying something about the caution in romantic affairs, the lack of confidence as a woman, and again in romantic affairs. And it's also Jupiter conjunct Saturn, Jupiter the planet of religion, in the 9th house of religion, conjunct Saturn. It really describes the really devout Catholicism that her and her family, her mother used to go to Mass every day. So the Jupiter-Saturn square Venus is describing the Catholicism and the romantic forbearance, shall we say. Now, if we go to the secondary progressions, what you actually see is that her progressed ascendant is at 2 of Leo. If you look in the 3rd house, you'll see the little pink arrow. The ascendant is at 2 of Leo and opposite Jupiter. So in other words, the progressed descendant is conjunct Jupiter. Jupiter, the planet that we associate with bounty. So this was the year that she made it. Any of your angles hitting Jupiter has to be good news, unless there's something else to the contrary. The other progression for the year was the progressed Mercury, now at 16 of Gemini, squaring her natal Mercury at 16 of Pisces. So we've got that as a progression. by direction, we've got the directed Neptune has moved from 10 of Scorpio in her 6th house to the descendant at 28 of Sagittarius. It doesn't actually happen until January 2010, and she did so well in 2009, obviously, but you have got Neptune descendant. So Neptune descendant, there's something about going out into the world, being open to people, and people being open to you. This idea of being open and boundaries being rubbed out, erased, is very Neptunian. The directed Saturn is conjunct Mercury as well. This was, again about Mercury, this was a year she had to learn how to communicate, really. Now, when something happens to you, and it's not just to you, it's a collective issue, you have to think about what's happening in the collective. So I want to come to that a little bit. And in 2009, in the UK and around the world, actually people were a tad depressed. The financial crisis had kind of kicked off in 2008, and a lot of people had either been made redundant or were facing redundancy and greater impoverishment. So what people really wanted, if you like, was a certain amount of hope and inspiration. Anyway, I'll come to that in a minute. So although the audition was televised on the 11th of April, the audition occurred on the 21st of January 2009. And here's the transits in slide 34. The transits are Jupiter at 347 of Aquarius, conjunct her Sun at more or less 3 of Aquarius, and the Sun is there. So in other words, she was having her Jupiter return, plus the Sun was triggering it, a Jupiter return. Now, Jupiter returns are quite nice, but this was amazingly nice. Now, the other thing that changed that was that Uranus, you'll see the red arrow on the slide, Uranus, transiting Uranus was at 19, nearly 20 of Pisces. So Uranus was semi-square the Jupiter. So it was a Uranus-Jupiter aspect. And Jupiter-Uranus is an aspect of unexpected luck. Unexpected luck. It's the bolt from the blue, the I can't believe it moment. And what is curious is that when the audition actually happened, transiting Jupiter, the red arrow on slide 35, transiting Jupiter was at 2101 of Aquarius, opposing her Uranus. So here she had Jupiter-Uranus again. This is absolutely the unexpected joy, because although, you know, the audition seemed to go well, it was when it was televised that things went berserk. And it was mostly through social media. Susan Boyle is the first star, if you like, using social media of Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, particularly YouTube. And I think that's to do with having Aquarius on the midheaven. And that's also partly why she was liked, because she's an ordinary woman. So ordinary women, you know, if this ordinary, not particularly massively attractive woman can do this, what can I do, was how the story kind of went. So, but as well as the Jupiter opposing the Uranus, by now the Neptune had moved round to 25, 26 of Aquarius. And later that year, within a month or so, well, Chiron's there, and Jupiter moved from 21 to 25, 26 of Aquarius. And when those planets are at 25, 26, they are semi-square the Sun, sesquiquadrate the Mars and sesquiquadrate the natal Neptune. And that would continue throughout 2010 when she got a recording contract, when she had tremendous problems from the media. She was hounded. She couldn't cope with it. She had a small breakdown when well, that's a different story. She had a breakdown when she didn't actually win Britain's Got Talent. But this is how you kind of work everything moving together, really. Let's see what the next... You may be interested also to look at the solar eclipse before Susan's birth. Some astrologers do this. They look at the eclipse before birth. And you have to remember that the eclipse before your birth may be many months before your birth, and many thousands, in fact millions of people will have been born in the interim. So you have to be a bit careful about taking this too seriously. But interestingly, the solar eclipse before Susan's birth is also the solar eclipse before Barack Obama's birth. And you'll notice that the eclipse is at 26 of Aquarius. The Sun and Moon are at 26 of Aquarius. So that's where the Neptune, the Jupiter and the Chiron all were in 2009 when she found fame. And she found fame because she sung the song from Les Miserables, I Dreamed a Dream. Now, the day before she did the audition, Barack Obama was inaugurated as president. And he was inaugurated on the ticket of dreams as well. And in his natal chart, he has a Mercury, Jupiter, Neptune, T-square. So I think he became president because of the same issue, the issue of being able to inspire and being able to sell hope, which is both what, in her own way, Susan Boyle did, and Barack, in his way, also did. So they both are, if you like, selling a dream. Now, so if you become famous, it's something about how you're feeding into the collective. So they were both feeding into the collective need for hope and inspiration. And Jupiter-Uranus, for part of the year, were linked in the sky, as you saw on the 21st of January. And so some really quite unusual things happened. So we had the first black president of the United States. We had an autistic woman win, or nearly win, a talent show. And in Iceland, we got the first gay woman prime minister out. It's never happened in the world before or after. So things opened up with the Neptune, and there was also anything could happen. So for a moment, it's like the collective opened up. So in some sense, Susan and Barack, and I dare say the president of Iceland at the time, the prime minister of Iceland at the time, were all in some sense conveying a message. We're all, if you like, pawns in a collective fate. And if you're quite famous, you can see it even more so. But anyway, this is an example of how you use transits together with progressions, transits together with solar arc directions, and transits with the natal chart. And I hope that is as clear as it can be. So I look forward to seeing you in future films and looking at other examples of things.